Okay, and that looks good. Alright, Unicorn, I know you may be a little worried, but it's just an exercise with the Sakura Empire today. I'm sure your team is more than happy to have you.
ユニコーン頑張る
That's the spirit. Now, I know the backline will have Akagi and Kaga today. They can be a little scary, but I don't think they're gonna do anything crazy.
外怖い
I need to go have a chat with the 1st Carrier Division. I'll be right back. Kaga!
あらおかえり指揮官様今までどこにいらっし
Shut it!
何か問題でも
Anyway, now that that's taken care of, it's time we moved on to our first healer carrier of this series, and that is none other than HMS Unicorn of the Royal Navy. Unicorn is in an interesting position. She's one of the many light carriers that exist in the game, and to add to that, she's also one of the many healers we have at our disposal as well. But of course, the real question is whether or not she stands out among those two groups. Or is the only reason she stands out is because she calls us Oni-chan? Anyway, let's take a look at her and see how she fares. Starting off with her survival stats, I do have to say her health pool surprises me compared to the other light carriers of her rarity. She easily beats all of them, and by a decent amount as well. She even comes close to beating some of the SRs. It's almost like a certain other carrier might have had her thickness rub off. No, it's the doll. It's gotta be the doll. It has to be the doll. Anyway, she'll have a pretty solid survival capability with that health pool. Now, her armor type is medium, and as such, that leaves her vulnerable to AP rounds from battleships and heavy cruisers. So while she may be a bit tankier in combat, she'll still take some pretty nasty damage from those particular guns, so make sure you exercise caution when engaging those particular enemies. However, she does lose the evasion game against most of the light carriers in her rarity. It's not a huge difference, but it's enough of one that it can play a part in their survivability. Lastly, her anti-air is above average compared to her light carrier counterparts, so she'll be a bit better at dealing with air-based attacks. Now, on the offense side of things, Unicorn has a somewhat low aviation stat, so her planes may not be as effective as some of the other light carriers in her rarity. On top of that, her reload is also a bit slower than most as well. So she not only won't hit as hard as others, she'll be a bit slower getting her planes out. However, it's important to take note of her overall kit. As I've mentioned before, carriers have a variety of arsenal setups, and each one can dictate how they play. Light carriers commonly deviate from the usual 3-plane type loadout, and Unicorn is of course no exception. Unicorn uses a fighter and a torpedo bomber for her planes, and has an anti-air gun in her 3rd slot. Now, her fighters get up to a max of 130% efficiency, which matches most of her counterparts, meaning her fighters will be just as effective if we decide to ignore aviation stat here. Now, if we look at her bombers, her torpedo bombers are at about a 130% efficiency, which actually puts her behind her counterparts, so that will have her doing less damage with them. When you couple this with her lowered aviation stat, we'll see that she's not going to be doing as good as the rest of them when it comes to damage output. Now, her anti-air gun sits at 80%, which is the same across all of her counterparts. If we were to couple this with her anti-air stat, Unicorn will do slightly better than most of her counterparts. Upon reaching max limit break, she will have 3 of both of her plane types. This loadout is honestly kind of similar among most of the people within her rarity, save for, well, Veza, who is equipped with a dive bomber rather than a torpedo bomber. You just had to be different, didn't you? Looking at things overall, though, we see that she's relatively survival focused, which, for a backliner, isn't generally the best thing. Backliners are generally where most of the damage comes from in a fleet, and so this really isn't a great thing for her at the moment. Even when we check her stat line at level 120, we see that she does get a good amount of boost to each of her stats, especially in the health department. It's not enough to fully catch her up to her counterparts though damage-wise. Now, we haven't addressed her skills yet, and this could give players a reason to use her in combat. Up first is Unicorn's first skill, Support Carrier, which heals your Vanguard for up to 8% of their max health. This skill is activated when she launches an airstrike. Now, this ability to heal is one of the qualities that helps her stand out among her counterparts. She may not have the damage output, but this healing skill does a good job at keeping your Vanguard alive. It's important to remember this. Unlike Akashi's healing, it only focuses on the Vanguard, so do keep that in mind if you start seeing some shots hitting your backline. One last thing to note about this is that the healing is based on each individual Vanguard's health pool. As such, the smaller the health pool on each Vanguard, the less it'll actually heal the ship girl for. Or, in other words, your destroyers won't benefit from the heal as much as your cruisers will. So, characters like Prince Eugen with her extra large health pool will be able to get a pretty strong heal off of it, but little destroyers like Eldritch may not get much of one. This skill is a very reliable healing skill that will do a great job keeping your Vanguard alive when fighting against enemies that are evenly matched, and can even keep them topped off on their health as the sorties go on. This can be extremely handy when doing sorties while completing the defeat all enemies requirement. Her second skill is Reload Command Vanguard, which increases the reload of your Vanguard members by up to 15%. Now this skill is a passive, so it's active as soon as you enter combat with her in your fleet. Now, reload is not a major stat to buff, and it's well known that once you get a decent amount above 100, the stat starts to show diminishing returns. Nonetheless, the extra reload will help speed up the damage that your Vanguard can bring. Guns and torpedoes will get a slight reduction in their cooldowns because of the buff, so it does help. But don't expect it to be a large jump in overall DPS. As one can see, it's becoming apparent that Unicorn takes a more supporting role with both buffs and healing. While most backliners focus on damage output, a smaller group focuses on supportive stances like healing, air control, and just buffing and debuffing. While it may not seem ideal to sacrifice damage output for a support ship, there will be times where they can be the decisive ship to bring into a fight. One of the biggest things I was tempted to do originally was to compare her against Shoho Retrofit. This was mostly due to them having the exact same kind of skill setup in which they both heal and buff. However, their buff type and plain loadouts cause them to deviate from each other and take completely different roles. In fact, many of the Azur healing roster characters all kind of follow this setup. Each of them, for the most part, are side grades of each other. So while Shoho has the same healing capability as Unicorn, she takes a more damage-dealing role with her loadout and buff. Unicorn, on the other hand, takes a more passive supporting role, given her skills and plain loadout. And that is pretty much what makes Unicorn who she is. She's a supportive light carrier that focuses on helping the Vanguard out by healing and buffing them. Her healing helps out more for cruisers than destroyers, but her buff helps both equally. Outside of that, her solid anti-air capabilities will help the fleet in controlling the airspace and taking out air-based threats. Now, while she may be able to take a few hits, just remember that she is still weak to battleship and heavy cruiser AP guns. Or Corgi, don't get any ideas, I swear to God, she's on your team. Nonetheless, she's a solid healer to bring if healing and or air support is something you very much need. Now the real question is, mob or boss fleet backliner? Generally, I don't use healers in my boss fleet. I've done it for only one particular setup, and that was Stun and Done. A fun fleet I like to use every now and then. Outside of that, healers are not generally used in boss fleets regardless of chapter. Again, it's always better to out DPS it than it is to out tank the boss. As such, Unicorn does a much better job as a mob fleet backliner. Her healing will definitely help Vanguards keep their health up, and give them slightly better DPS during their fights. As mentioned before, this is extremely useful when attempting the defeat all enemies condition, as you won't have to rely on the zombie type ships like Minneapolis or many of the other cruisers and destroyers available. Her AA control can also help if you're running less AA effective ships, or you could just take everyone's number one Sandy, right? All in all, Unicorn definitely is a solid healer that can help your Vanguard and provide a decent anti-air support as well. She is not too impressive damage-wise, so don't expect her to MVP a lot. Nonetheless, she's a good girl that'll do her best to protect her teammates and her friends. Just make sure that she's someone that you'll protect as well. And that'll be all for Unicorn. Hope you enjoyed this video and that it will help you in your future endeavors. Up next, I've decided to push one ship forward since we've covered her sister, and that's Indianapolis. Look forward to when that video comes out and also hope that Portland doesn't kill me over it. Whether you're a regular viewer or a patron supporting the channel on Patreon, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again real soon.